Hello everyone, I'm Mark Baines with Training Made Fun, the Executive Director for Training Made Fun. And once again, this is the second component of our program design presentation in designing programs for being more safe, being more efficient, and being more effective for any individual. And once again, there are more specific guidelines we'd have to follow if we have a specific athlete we're looking to help. But generally speaking, these parameters are true of anyone trying to achieve any reasonable level of performance before worrying about sports level athletic performance. You need to do these things first. That being said, in the previous video we talked about health-related fitness and skill-related fitness, and now we're moving on to physiological fitness. And assuming that we properly train these various components of health-related fitness and skill-related fitness over the course of a given training year, we should always be looking at training from a year perspective, or at least a majority of the year training perspective. We have to have some downtime too, a couple weeks off here and there. But generally speaking, not more than any 2 weeks off at a time, because once again, any more than about 2 weeks off starts to see a minimum of about 5% drop in performance parameters as it relates to both force output and generally speaking, VO2 max or aerobic type capacity work for cardiovascular fitness. So we're trying to avoid anything more than a couple weeks off if we can at all do so over the course of a given training year. That said, if you want to see someone improve their metabolism, metabolic fitness, improve their metabolism, we've got to get away from this concept of referring to workouts as metabolic workouts. But that's really just a fancy way of saying it's a more challenging, high-intensity type training session, which is fine when the person's ready for a higher intensity training session. But we also have to understand that generally speaking, our lower intensity sessions are the kinds of sessions that we could potentially do every single day. When we engage in more moderate intensity type training, if you can come back and do it again the next day, fantastic. But generally speaking, you might expect to see about 24 to 48 hours between a more moderate intensity type training session. The higher intensity sessions, which are generally speaking, we're talking about maximal strength, maximal power, maximal speed, and maybe some high-level interval type training, which is more glycolytic in nature. So I want to make sure you look at the general breakdown of energy systems in the videos referring to cardiovascular training and energy systems in general. That said, when we talk about metabolism, we want to see it improve metabolically, no matter regardless of the goal, toward lower intensity or longer duration time focused on whatever your goal may be, we should say. Metabolism will improve if you have the proper gauging of these levels of training. You have your lower intensity you could do pretty much every day, as we said. Moderate intensity maybe every 24 to 48 hours. And your higher intensity stuff that we just referred to, probably not any sooner than 48 hours, more likely up to 72 to 96 hours, 3 to 4 days between doing it again. And we really don't want to see any of the higher intensity type training till at least the person's achieved a reasonable base of health-related type fitness. If we don't engage in high-level interval training till they have reasonable levels of these factors to be determined by the professional who's doing the training. That said, what metabolism really is the sum total of all the chemical and physiological processes that convert food into energy. So if you have a higher metabolism, you're going to basically make better utilization of the food you do take in, as well as be able to do more with that food. You can have energy for longer durations. You're more likely to develop muscle growth from the things you take in. Because your metabolism is higher, your body's more efficient as a whole. And that said, on a given day, your metabolism can be higher or lower than normal, depending upon whether you've taken care of yourself the last 24 to 48 hours. Like all given training sessions on a given day, you have to take into account not just the general conditioning level of the person we're talking about, but is this a good day or not a good day? They feeling good, not feeling good. We take into account their resting heart rate in the morning. We take into account the heart rate before we begin the training session, also called the initial heart rate. We take into account their RPE, a scale of 1 to 10, how they're feeling. And we also take into account how they're performing as we watch them move, movement scale-wise. Is their form, their technique strong, sound? If it's not, we don't worry about producing higher levels of force. We've got to worry about basic level recovery, basic level endurance, and get ready for tomorrow, as opposed to worrying about what we're going to be doing today, because we're clearly not ready for anything very challenging. You want to see that metabolism really improve over time, you need to have consistent exercise. The only thing that improves metabolism, the only thing, that's right, the only thing that improves metabolism is movement. Okay? If you eat really, really well and get good sleep and your life stress is low, great. Fantastic. And you sit there all day long and don't do anything. You don't move. You're not going to have a high metabolism. You're not, because you're not moving. Granted, if you move a lot but you don't get enough sleep, or you have too high of life stress, or you don't eat well, that can lower your metabolism too. But you need to understand, generally speaking, strong nutrition or a strong diet in general can normalize your metabolism. It doesn't raise it. Yeah, you eat a bunch of peppers and drink a bunch of caffeine. Short term, you might see an improvement, but you're also going to see a downturn long term if that's not coupled with movement. Likewise, you get a good night's rest, you'll feel normal. You feel real good, but that's normal for you. You're not going to improve and see an improvement in metabolism by continuing to get good sleep every night for long periods of time. It doesn't work like that. It's going to normalize. And likewise, reducing your life stress is going to help that as well. Only exercise, though, is going to stimulate an uptick longer term in your metabolism, which is what you want to see for every human being, really, because they're going to feel better, be able to do more things with less effort, have more energy, feel good both from a standpoint of physiologically, which will affect them psychologically and help them deal with situations where they don't get proper rest, where they don't eat properly, or they have too much going on in their lives as stress. Again, exercise is one of those behavioral outcomes that we can have a tremendous level of control over when we can't always control some of the other factors quite so well. And generally speaking, we want to control our controllables as much as we can, right? So if you want to see an improvement in metabolism, it's not let's do the metabolic workout. Okay? It's be consistent with what you do on a regular basis. Move as much as you possibly can on any given day. You don't feel good, then the person needs to be doing as much lower intensity, longer duration activity as they possibly can in a given day. And when they're ready, they can go certainly more challenging, more higher intensity type days if they have the background for it and they feel good on a given day. But you want to see long-term metabolic improvements. It takes time, several months, before you really start seeing a new level of metabolic improvement, whereby the person is clearly able to take in more and doesn't see the same negative effects of weight gain, or they're able to make more out of what they currently take in. One of the coolest things we've all experienced who have been in a situation where you have a high metabolism. And yeah, you can have a naturally high metabolism to somebody else, but your metabolism will not stay high without the movement. But when you're doing really well and exercising on a regular basis, you'll notice that when you have a bad meal, so to speak, and don't eat very well, or you even get a poor night's rest, it doesn't affect you as much. That's the benefit. And morphologic fitness, or changes in size and shape, that takes several months to change, just like metabolic fitness takes several months to change. Generally speaking, we're really talking about someone who wants to make significant changes themselves from a more health or general welfare position as opposed to athletic performance-wise, to see significant weight loss slash metabolic improvement, so they look like they're changing size and shape, they feel better, and they have more energy and can do more things as well. It's about a 4 to 6 month time frame where they look in the mirror and go, you know what, it's finally happening. That's assuming they're doing things right over the course of the 4 to 6 months and not having time off other than a day or two here or there. They're exercising on a regular basis, which means really, ideally, every single day, or at least every other day at the very, very least, 3-4 days per week, preferably 6-7 days a week, and if at all possible, more than once a day. Yeah, it's a lot to expect, but that would be ideal. Okay, that would be ideal. You want to see size and shape change? You cannot change the shape of a muscle. A muscle fiber will grow, muscle fibers will grow, or a single fiber will grow if trained properly over time. However, you cannot change its shape. It's shaped the way that it's shaped. If you're not going to be able to change any aspect or shape of muscle. It'll get bigger, it'll get smaller, and that's the shape it's going to take on when it gets bigger or smaller. There's nothing you can do about that other than to focus on proper movement that's going to engage the proper muscle fibers to see growth over time if you're trying to see some size change there to the positive. But that said, morphologic fitness and metabolic fitness kind of go hand in hand. You're feeling good and looking better significantly after about a few months of significant, regular, consistent training, movement. Okay? And there's no way around it if you want to see changes in both those things and maintain those changes. You can shortcut the diet, which, by the way, is a thing that everyone looks to do who doesn't take care of themselves, doesn't want to exercise. Sooner or later, they're going to turn to just not eating. And they're going to cite some study about intermittent fasting without understanding it. They're going to be saying something about how they've got too many calories already today, so I need to not eat the rest of the day. Things that just don't logically make any sense from a metabolic standpoint, from an overall well-being standpoint. But that makes sense to the person at the time because they're thinking, well, I've already gone over the deep end one meal or yesterday, so I got to make up for it by going drastically low today or the next 2 or 3 days, or skipping meals throughout the day because I'm behind, or drastically reducing my weight energy intake, because that's the problem as to why I'm big, as opposed to I'm not taking care of myself as a whole, which is much broader than just calories in, calories out, which we hope if you're a fitness professional or a coach, you would never use that phrase, because it's just not that mathematically simple. It's not just an addition problem. It's a calculus problem of ridiculous algorithmic proportions. It's much more complicated. You can't change one variable and expect that to overall change to the positive everything. Okay. That said, bone integrity, we're increasing the density of bone. The only way you can do that is compressive force activities, which means pushing exercises, walking, jumping, running, overhead presses, squats, deadlifts, lunges, anything that loads through. You're standing upright and you're loading your body. That'll affect it. Pushing things, though, pushing, not pulling. You do a row or a high row, reverse fly, things like that, knee leg curls, any of that knee, which essentially is knee flexion. All that stuff is not going to do anything for bone density. They're fine exercises for whatever purpose you might have for them, but they are not going to improve bone density. That's why walking is the most important exercise for every human being from both a cardiovascular standpoint, let alone a psychological standpoint and a bone density standpoint. And from the standpoint of loading for your arms, your shoulders, elbows, wrist, fingers, doing some pressing exercises that are engaging those different joints to be able to build bone in those joint areas as well. Okay. That said, moving into a general training session on a given day. Generally speaking, warm-up should be 5 minutes to about 15 minutes. If we're doing a power, speed, agility type training session, it's going to be fairly high intensity, and you're going to need longer rest between, and you don't want to fatigue the person in the warm-up. So you really want to keep the workouts warm-up, or really training sessions warm-up, to about 5 minutes, 3 to 5 minutes. Okay. Generally speaking, 10 to 15 minutes is a good general warm-up time frame. If it's extremely cold, or they're extremely out of shape, or they move really, really poorly, you may need to add more time to that warming up period of time to gradually build up their motor control, build up their movement skill, get them loosening up, feeling good. You got to understand the primary goal of the warm-up is not blood circulation and blood temperature and body temperature. We say those things a lot. They are aspects of what happens during a proper warm-up, but that is not the goal. If that were true, we could sit in a hot room or go sit in a hot tub, and that's our warm-up. Okay, that's just not the case. Or just get really stressed out, because getting really stressed out will increase your body temperature and you'll increase blood flow, but not necessarily in the way that you're wanting it to the specific areas that you need it, and specific ways that fire the right muscle fibers at the right time in the right sequence. So clearly movement matters, and what movements you specifically pick matter in your warm-up to get the benefit from them to whatever follows next. If you're doing an upper body training day, you better make sure the warm-up relates to your upper body. Okay? If you're doing a lower body type focused training day for strength training, you better make sure your warm-up is specific to that. If you're going to be swimming, make sure that your warm-up is specific to the needs that you're going to have for the joint actions that are involved in swimming. Make your warm-up very, very specific. There's nothing wrong with having a general warm-up for someone just trying to do something to get some benefit from exercise. But for the longer-term benefit of getting benefit from exercise, to continue to see improvements long-term, you need to be as specific as possible with a few basic exercises that you pick that are the most specifically individually needed for the person we're training in this given day. Okay, and that said, strength training, we're looking at 30 to 60 minute time frame. You can certainly get benefits from strength in less than 30 minutes. There's no question about it. You have no time on your hands, just simply doing one plank or basically a prone bridge or a set of push-ups or some overhead presses or some band pulls or something like that. So just doing something when you don't normally do anything is going to give you some strength benefit. But when we refer to strength training to see consistent longer-term development, we're looking at probability of need to spend a little bit more time in the strength phase of training on a given training session, probably closer to a half an hour ideally, not including your warm-up and your cool down, but not more than an hour. If your primary goal in the benefit of your strength training type session, which again, strength is the ability to produce force, which could be any number of ways you're going to do that, okay? We don't want to be probably more than an hour if the goal of this given training session is to increase power, speed, or maximal strength. Okay, it's supposed to be a fast type training that you're trying to gear for, or be able to produce significant amount of explosive power, or significant amount of force output, or get big muscles, get hypertrophy to grow bigger. You do not want that training session to go more than an hour, not including the warm-up and the cool down. Okay, because after about an hour of fairly challenging exercise, testosterone levels will begin to drop significantly. And if they're dropping significantly, that's going to affect us negatively from a hormonal perspective, which is going to affect us negatively from a performance perspective, which means we're just beating ourselves up at that point. What you'll often hear about sometimes is power athletes or bodybuilders and whatnot. What they'll do is they'll get their training session in just under an hour, somewhere around an hour, not including the warm-up and the cool down, and then they'll come back in later to the day. For the crazy ones who have the capacity to be able to do that from a training perspective and the time to be able to do such things would be ideal. Or if nothing else, at least come back again tomorrow or a couple of days from now and do it again. But don't force the issue. And a good rule of thumb is always leave a little bit left in the tank. Oh, that goes counter to a lot of things we've been told before in the past. But just because it's been said by a million people does not make it right. It has to be appropriate in a general perspective, or a more specific perspective, we should say, for the person we're talking about. Let's be careful with generalities. Let's be clear about what we know from a research perspective, how it affects people, and then make sure we understand the specific situation of the person we're training. That said, strength does not have to come before cardiovascular training in a given training session. Some people say that. It's really specific to your goals. If your goals have a greater need toward cardiovascular training, that should come first. Strength will follow it, or strength can come on a different day that's less important for you from a standpoint of what your training level energy is right now. We're going to focus more on strength cardiovascular training. For me, from a former middle distance runner, basketball player, and some other sports, of course, like many of us played multiple sports, but mostly my primary sport was towards track. I was a middle distance athlete. During the time I was training, my predominant focus was not strength training, it was cardiovascular. So what's going to take the back seat? Strength training. Okay. And then there became a period of time where I was more focused on wanting to build more strength as an adult past my sports performance days. And so I focused more on the strength. And then I realized I'd lost a lot of cardiovascular. So guess what I've done is swung back based upon specific current goals toward cardiovascular training, with the strength training taking a back seat. It's all goal specific to the individual's needs. That said, cardiovascular training, whenever you choose to do it, could be as little as 2 minutes. Oh, you're not going to get fit in 2 minutes. But that 2 minutes, we're talking about the person who doesn't do anything. And we've probably all known people like this. Maybe it's someone who's watching this video right now. But don't do any exercise at all. 2 minutes of cardiovascular level exercise, which means lower intensity, moderate intensity at most, not something that gets you out of breath, okay? Something that's mildly challenging at most, but it's more than you would normally do. You engage for 2 minutes straight. You walk out the door and walk down the block and come back. You cycle for a couple minutes. You row for a couple minutes or swim for a couple minutes. And that might seem like nothing. When you already do nothing, that makes a significant difference. Now, that said, difference in what way? Health-wise. You can actually reduce, or we should say increase, the cardioprotective benefits to the heart up to about 50%, decreasing the probability of having a heart attack by that level, 50%, over the course of the next 24 to 48 hours. That's why you want to make sure you engage, if nothing else, on a daily basis for those people whose health is in question, very light level, short cardiovascular training, if they can't go longer duration or higher intensities. And that said, unless their goal is to be an endurance athlete or some sports performance goal, there's no reason to go more than 30 to 40 minutes, maybe 45 minutes of cardiovascular training on a given day, unless they enjoy it or they have a specific sports performance goal. That's fantastic. If you get someone to give you 30, 40, 45 minutes, 3 to 5 to as much as 6 or 7 times a week, that would be phenomenal. This person long-term is not going to have a problem with metabolism, as long as they're not beating themselves up with too high of an intensity during that duration. Right? What makes something prolonged or too long is specific to the person themselves. If they're not used to doing anything, you don't give them 30 minutes. We give them a few minutes. Okay? When they've done a few minutes, we give them a few more minutes and keep increasing from there. We often hear about this magic number of cardiovascular training. You hear it quite frequently, actually, of 20 minutes. Well, to see significant VO2 max or aerobic capacity and long-term improvements to overall cardiovascular conditioning, let alone start to use more preferentially toward fat with less toward carbohydrate, we start getting that 20-plus minute time frame. We start to see more of a benefit there from a standpoint of going for longer duration. However, it doesn't mean you burn more fat as a whole. No. You just burn more fat and less toward carbohydrate at that longer duration point. And it doesn't make longer better. It really makes a question of what the primary goal is you're trying to get from it. And when you can't perform higher intensities, it makes sense to go longer, but it can't be so much of a high intensity that you can't sustain it well, that your heart rate goes too high, that your perception of effort is too high. And those are all factors we have to take into account. and more at the workshop, we talk about the hands-on component of cardiovascular training. And that said, I wouldn't go more than 30 to 45 minutes on a daily basis, certainly at least every 1 to 3 days doing so. 3 days is even too long, but every other day at the very, very least doing your basic cardiovascular type work. And yes, you can't just do strength work and you can't just do cardiovascular work. You need to see combinations of that for general well-being and welfare. I'm not talking about an athlete who has a specific purpose and a need. We're talking about the general welfare of humans and their need to be healthy, well, strong, fit, and have energy to be able to perform things they need to in their lives. And then cool down and flexibility after that. We add flexibility, just like with the warm-up, really kind of, you really could say is part of that overall time frame, or maybe adding more time in. So with a cool down and flexibility, could be 5 minutes for a cool down if it's really hot out, just like the warm-up. I didn't say it before, but if it's really hot and humid, we also keep the cool down and the warm-up short. Okay, and the flexibility work as well, not too terribly long. But once again, about 5 minutes is about an ideal cool down when it's really hot out, or was like a power workout. You need some light stuff to do afterward to try to fatigue you following your training session. Typically is about 10 to 15 minutes for a typical cool down, but it could be longer if the person has a need to cool down for longer periods. Because the primary goal of the cool down is to return the body back toward homeostasis, to get you back to a more normalized level as soon as possible, to get you back to the point where you more or less feel like after your training session is over, like I know I trained at a fairly challenging level for me, but at the same time, I felt like as soon as I finished that cool down, I felt like I can almost go back and do some more. That's exactly what you should feel like after you cool down. Not you feel beat up, tired, worn down. That's just completely incorrect and the wrong way to train. It happens sometimes, and it's not always our intention. It happens that way, but it's never the goal to beat you up, wear you down, or make it hard to recover from what you're doing. If you can't recover from what you're doing, you can't gain maximal benefit from it. That's a simple physiological fact. Okay? And that said, that's a basic concept of a typical training session. Whereas you might not necessarily do strength and cardio together, but if you did, that's the rough format you'd be looking at. Okay? But the whole goal is progression, progression, progression. Let's get better. And we do that by looking at these variables, also known as the fitter variables. Frequency, how often do you train? Every day, every other day, every 3 days? Do we know what we're going to do during those time frames? Make sure you specifically program that out and be as clear as possible with those specific parameters that are dependent upon, once again, the person's goals, as well as where they are, their current level of conditioning, not just from a general perspective, but in a given training year. An athlete in a given sport will go through certain sequences and cycles in a given year, then come back and start over again and do it again. Whereas people in the fitness field, unfortunately, far too often stick with one area and that's all they ever do, or randomly jump back and forth. It's not what a professional athlete does. It's not what a general fitness enthusiast should do either. It should be a very specific breakdown of exercise specific goals over a given period of time throughout the year, and cycle back over and start it again at the beginning of the year. What's the beginning of the year? Well, whenever the person needs to peak. Right after that is the beginning of the year again. Okay. Intensity-wise, generally speaking, people measure intensity in the weight room with the weight. They measure intensity with cardio, either duration or with heart rate. Most people don't use heart rate. They use more towards duration. I'm going to go for 20 minutes. I'm going to go for 40 minutes. And in the weight room, they'll go, I lifted 50 pounds. I had 20-pound dumbbells. I did 15 reps, things like that. Those aren't wrong, although with an intensity perspective, what we really want you to be looking at is, from intensity perspective, perception of effort on a scale of 1 to 10. Be very specific about what the expectation of perception of effort is or should be on a given day. And you can't be 10, 10, 10 all the time without beating someone up and decreasing the strength of the immune system, getting a person more likely to be injured or ill. And everybody who trains that way will become particularly sick or particularly injured at some point if it hasn't already happened numerous times already. And intensity also measured in terms of heart rate. Yeah, in the weight room, you should be taking your heart rate after every single set, so you know objectively, internally, how the body's responding to stress. How you feel is a perception of effort, is a perception of what's going on. And your muscle feels like it's sore. That's perception of effort. That's all not objective. It's important, but it's not objective. The only objective data you can give yourself in a given training session is going to be, in addition to your movement skill, you can either do something or you can't. You can do it well or you can't, is your heart rate, which is why we take it throughout the training session, regardless of the goal, after every given short or longer work period, or at intervals during constant exercise, whenever you're doing continuous exercise like cardiovascular training. Okay. always take the heart rate. And you have to know more specifically, looking back to the energy systems, looking back toward cardiovascular training as it relates to strength training or pure cardiovascular focus. Again, they're both forms of resistance training. Be clear about what expectation of heart rate is. And heart rate should never be get the heart rate to a certain point. It's don't go above a certain point. Okay. And beyond that, T here, we're talking about time and attention. How long should the work period be? It's very short for power, speed, maximal strength. Gets a little bit longer. We start looking at hypertrophy, closing on that basically 40 seconds to a little over a minute. And we start looking at more towards interval type training, well, somewhere between 20-30 seconds to about 2 minutes. And endurance type training is at least 2 minutes or longer because of the energy system changes that you'll want to review the energy system videos on this to know when we're moving from one energy system to the other based both on time as well as intensity. Okay. And then second T here is type or tool. What tool are we going to use? Is it going to be a band? Is it going to be a dumbbell? Is it going to be a kettlebell? Is it going to be body weight? Is it going to be a cable machine? Be very careful with saying things like, we like to do body weight stuff first. Well, if you're looking at lower body training, a body weight squat is going to be easier than doing a squat with weight on you because that's actually more difficult. However, a push-up is more difficult for most people than grabbing 5 or 10 or 15 pound dumbbells and laying on your back on a bench and doing a press. The dumbbell exercise is actually easier. So why you would say bodyweight exercise first doesn't make any sense. Okay, it's very much specific to understanding the capacity of the body as a general rule, and then also applying that to the individual needs of the person we're training. Okay, there's no exact rule here, but don't make general statements like bodyweight first, or I don't use machines. Why would you not use machines? Because machines aren't functional. How are machines not functional? Well, it doesn't match the motion I want. It didn't match a goal-specific need you had. Fair enough. There's a given motion that I want. It needs to go in a given range of motion. The joints need to move in a certain way, and that machine can't do that. Fair enough. But if you have a specific motion that you're looking for, which should be always the goal of why you do a given strength exercise before you even determine what your tool is you're going to use, if the machine, whether it's a single joint axis or it is a machine that has what we call 1, 2, or 3 degrees of freedom. 1 degree of freedom, it can only go one way. It's basically revolves along one axis. It can go 2 ways. It often has 2 axes. It can do a couple things, like some machines can, or something like a cable, whereby you can, anywhere you go, the cam can move to some extent too. You can go anywhere you want to go and still get some resistance there. That's what we call 3 degrees of freedom. Just like normal joint motion in real life, there are 3 degrees of freedom in space, right? Be clear about your goal. Be clear that the motion itself is able to be sufficiently met by the machine or equipment you're using, but don't make it about good versus bad. Bands, generally speaking, bands are great to attach anywhere, very portable, really easy to use, can attach it to anything and do a pushing or pulling type exercise, but you also have to understand that the more you pull on a band or the more you push on the band as you push away, the resistance increases. That is not the way your joints work. You don't actually get continual increasing strength throughout an entire range of motion all the way to end range. Actually, somewhere around mid-range, generally speaking, for a single joint is about where you're strongest. Consequently, you continuing to increase the resistance beyond the point where you're getting stronger as you're getting weaker is counterproductive. It's going to create motor skill challenges. You're going to have poor movement skill, and you're going to be putting added stress to the joint with minimal stress benefit to the muscles and the joints as a whole. And that's not what we want. Bands are what you use when cables aren't available and or the dumbbell exercise is not going to fit, or you only have bands. Then you work with the bands. But I wouldn't pick them in a machine exercise situation where you have a cable pulley and adjustable weight stack. You can get more benefit out of utilizing that in most situations, most exercises, than you can with a band. Be more specific about what you need, when you need it, and why. Not just, this is a cool tool, or this is fun, or I saw so-and-so using it, right? And the first R here, rest and recovery. If we're talking about low-intensity work, then, not surprisingly, we can keep the rest periods quite short. But when you start engaging in higher intensity type work, you have to increase the rest period. Yes, we just said you have to increase the rest period. All too often nowadays, it seems very popular to have high burst intensity effort, not output. Don't confuse effort with output. The mistake that's often made in training is people say we're doing a high intensity session or a metabolic type workout, and they go really hard as they can for 10, 20, 30, 40 seconds, something like that, with like a 10, 20, 30 second break, and they go again, boom, 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 back and forth, without recognizing the fact that you just asked your body to perform high levels of effort for whatever period you said, depending on the duration of time. If you're giving maximal effort, you're not going to be able to give maximal effort after about 10 seconds of work. Maximal output, excuse me. You can give maximal effort for as long as you need because you're just doing the best you can. That's maximal effort. Don't confuse maximal effort with maximal output. However, after a few seconds, your output drops. So, is that what you wanted? You're okay with 90-95% force output? All right, well, you got that to about 10-15 seconds-ish. And then about 90% is about the best case scenario for you for 15, 20, 25 seconds, somewhere in there. And then you got maybe 30 seconds for some top level athletes and well-conditioned individuals. And we start going towards 85, 90% or less force output at about 30, 40 seconds in, somewhere in there. And we start going down to about 70% output at the most around 60 seconds. 70, 75% maybe for some individuals. Okay. Again, maybe some high level athletes, maybe a little higher than that, but not too much, not too often. Okay. And it's going to be going down, down, down the longer you go. So be clear about your work period, what it is, make sure that's consistent with the level of force output you're looking for, strength or endurance-wise, whatever you want. Make sure you understand what the force output expectation is before you start worrying about how long you should go, how short your rest should be. And the more the force output's supposed to be up, the longer the rest period needs to be. Okay. And then, of course, the last R is more in terms of rate of progression. Generally speaking, you don't want to increase any given variable, frequency, intensity, time under tension, type, or recovery. Don't want to increase it, make it more challenging, any more than about 10% in a given week, also known as a microcycle. Okay, not more than 10%, which means very, very small changes, nothing too dramatic. If probably closer to 1 to 5% if we can. Don't make big jumps. Okay, please be careful with that. And really, the primary goal we're trying to achieve with exercise is specificity. We're trying to pick the right exercise to meet the goal. We're trying to get the proper specific adaptation to imposed demands. You pick the right exercise to meet the goal, that's specificity. Whatever you do in how you perform exercise is always going to be the specific adaptation to imposed demands that you get. However, we want to make sure that specificity, our intended goal by the exercise we're utilizing here, gets the proper response, which is the SAID. SAID happens no matter what. And your body's going to specifically do the best that it can, whatever you're asking it to do. But the onus upon us as designers of training is to pick the right exercise to meet the goal and make sure it's performed properly so we get the proper adaptation to imposed demands. And that concludes part 2 of program design. Part 3 up next.